Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for coming today. I really, really appreciate it. It's nice to see such a full room, by the way. You don't really see fullness in Santon anymore. You just see empty parking lots and things. So I'm really glad to see it. Good morning. My name is Stephen Curtis, and welcome to our event this morning. And thank you so much for coming to CEO Connect 2023. By the way, that is the Wi-Fi password. Very cunning, aren't we? But the Wi-Fi password, if you need it, is CEO Connect, capital C, capital E, capital O, capital C, CEO Connect 2023. And I'd like to thank our partners in this, in particular, KPMG, Shift, the Shared Value Africa Initiative, and the University of Johannesburg. And I really do appreciate you giving up time on your Friday morning in particular to come in and do this, when I know there are all sorts of things that you promised would get done by the end of the week. I would also like to welcome you if you're on the streaming platform today. Thank you for giving us the time and the sheer brain space to actually be a part of what we're doing here. This week, Statistics South Africa released data that shows there are 2 million more men with jobs than women. But, as you know, the majority of our country is women. Almost everything you need to know about gender in our country is in that one simple fact. And so often, the people who make the decisions, the people who make the hiring decisions, are often men. 5% of the CEOs of JSE-listed companies are women. We all know about the gender gap, which is still so prevalent. And this suggests that one of the major places, perhaps the major place, where we need to change our conversations around gender is in the minds of men. So often I find if I'm speaking to someone in a public way, if I'm on radio or TV, if I'm speaking to someone about gender, I'm never talking to a man. Never. There's one person at the Human Rights Commission who's a man who will talk about gender. Everyone else, I always find them in conversations with women. And why is that? And this is why this morning we have the lineup that we do. So unless men are forced, or specifically invited, because we're a bit sensitive, but unless they're specifically invited, they will not talk about gender. And that's specifically what today is about. And yes, men, I think, sometimes have to be forced, perhaps because it's not in their interest, but that's what makes it so interesting and so important. Some of the other numbers that we have around this are important. The latest pilot study by KPMG, for example, finds that employees of corporates overwhelmingly believe that more should be done to change, as they put it, the culture of toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and male supremacy. In fact, the report says only 8% of the people they asked in corporates disagree with that. I mean, it's an overwhelming finding. And yet, in reality, change is still happening so slowly. So there's a lot going on here. What the reports all show is that there's a need for leadership. And I think it's that leadership that we're looking to today in some ways. Someone who was really a leader in this field for a very long time, a man who was a leader in this field for a long time, and one of the biggest change makers we've seen in this field for a long time, was Eusebius McKaiser, who passed away earlier this year. And I know he's played a big role in these conversations in the past. He would have loved that, by the way. He was someone who played such a big role in what Eusebius had the ability to do. And I'll use a word I learned from him, privileged. I was privileged enough to spend 25 years of my life knowing him, all the way from debating at Rhodes University, all the way through to working together, yes, sometimes arguing together, but usually working together. And it was something, so often I'll be approaching an issue and I'll think, how would Eusebius do this? What would he say? If he were listening to me, what would he tell me that I've got wrong? And that's what makes him so interesting. But he was someone who forced change. He provoked change all the time. And if you were in an argument with him, you knew in the end you were the person who was going to have to change. The other thing that Eusebius did, I think, and I say this being very aware of my identity, I hope, is that he sometimes would make you feel uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable is a really important process for many of us on this road to change. If you're not feeling uncomfortable and you're in a position of power, then maybe you've misunderstood the problem. And I think Eusebius taught me that above all else. Eusebius, we will miss your intellect, and we will miss your provocation, and we will miss your ability to make change. We are, of course, sitting here in the JSE. We are getting more chairs for you in the JSE. I think we have enough now. I hope you have the Wi-Fi password. And I think it's appropriate that we give the JSE a moment to welcome you to their space and to the conversation. Voyo Lee is the Director of Marketing and Corporate Affairs for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Voyo, may I invite you to come and welcome us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that introduction. It's really a pleasure to welcome you all today to what is probably the busiest month of the year for women. Somebody actually said last week that, isn't it amazing how in Women's Month, the women are working the hardest? That's like the month where we really graft the hardest. And for once, we should actually see the men do the work in August and we should just chill, you know? And it really is amazing to see the men in this room today who show that it is possible for us to have conversations and celebrate with men Women's Month. So it's really great. And I want to commend you all for coming through, gentlemen. We see you. We acknowledge you. Thank you so much. So we always think about holidays as, you know, just a free day for us to not to go to work. But it's always important to remember why we're commemorating Women's Day. It's always to remember that we are commemorating a significant moment in our women's history, in our country's history for that matter. 67 years ago, 20,000 women courageously marched to the union buildings in protest against oppressive past laws. And while the plight may be different to the one in 1956, South African women today are still fighting the good fight. And this time is to ensure that there is collective progression and transformation in the workplace. And it's an honor to welcome you all this morning to what I believe will be very thought-provoking discussions on the topic of gender equality in the workplace. Gender equality, equity, parity are words that we use interchangeably, even though they mean different things. However, what is common is that at the end of the day, they champion the same thing. They champion the right to give women equal access, opportunity, and representation. And I mean, we all know the very shocking statistic that it will take another 132 years to address the global gender gap. I was thinking about it. I was like, if I have my daughter and she chooses to have children, that is about 7 generations. That's a very, very long time. Too long for that matter. And bringing it home to our borders, we have women who are 50% of the country's population. I think slightly more, Stephen, probably 51, 52%. And yet, when you look at the boardrooms and leadership positions in institutions, both public sector and private sector, we are the minority. The Sustainable Stock Exchange did a study to look at, in the top 100 listed companies across the world, how does representation look? The JSE, we were very proud of the fact that we are the leading emerging market country in terms of representation, but it was 28% of women in leadership positions in boards. 2% of that is CEOs, so 2% of the top 100 listed companies, CEOs are female, and 5% are chairing the boards. So I think whilst it shows progress, it is quite a glaring statistic. The leading exchange was Euronext Paris with 44% representation, but that was because 40%, there's a mandatory requirement in the country to have 40% representation. So they are compelled from a compliance perspective. And while I believe that we are making progress in advancing gender equality, I think there is more ground that needs to be covered. Tackling inequality and equity really does require a multifaceted and multi-stakeholder approach, and that really demands both the private sector and the public sector to play a role in creating inclusivity and sustainable solutions. I think that it is up to all of us in leadership to raise awareness about gender equality and its benefits. What I've always said about gender equality is that it needs to be a clear management action. It can't be just a byproduct. If you have clear management actions, then you will achieve the objectives that we have. And the leaders who can make the change are really in this room. So there's really no excuse. It can be done. It's really up to us to demonstrate the will to get it done. And on that note, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to you all. to this very important engagement, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this pivotal discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you, Stephen.
Well, as you know, we are going to move along as quickly as we can. As you know, it's also been put together, the event, by the Shared Value Africa Initiative, and the person, of course, who does all of it, I'm not entirely sure how she does it all at the same time, is Tiki Barnard, is their CEO. Tiki?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today. And thank you, Prof, for making the time to be with us. And I want to start off with a quote from the late Nelson Mandela that said, "It always seems impossible till it's done." And going back 3 years, 2020, when we started the Shared Value Africa Initiative, It's Not Okay movement, because we believe that gender-based violence is not okay and gender inequality is not okay. It was very difficult at the time. It seemed impossible because very few people wanted to talk to us and very few people actually wanted to acknowledge that we had a problem. So standing in front of you here today, I feel immensely hopeful, and I feel that our work has not been in vain, because we've got almost 200 of you sitting in this room today, and it means there's a small shift happening. So, and Ignatius, I just want to say thank you to you and KPMG for the support the last 3 years, and for believing like us that gender equality can be an economic game changer. And also what I wanted to add, though, is that gender equality is not dependent on government, civil society, corruption, load shedding. It's dependent on our mindsets and our unconscious bias. So moving to a crucial aspect of the shared value advocacy, we advocate, and I'm saying this, and I always say that to you, Prof, we advocate that gender equality needs the same merit, it warrants the same merit and the same importance as climate change. Because if we don't do that, we are never going to achieve just transition. It will remain unattainable. Denying equal rights to any individual is just not fair. And also, it's a barrier to our ability to implement and to implement and change and create that green, resilient, equal development that we're all talking about. And today is about, as Stephen said, it's about hearing KPMG's, their latest pilot study that they did, and Peter is going to talk about that a little bit later. It is also for me what is so great, and I think you said it, Rio, about the male voices in the room today. For me, I've been at many August month women events, and we always only hear the women's voices. So today, it's about hearing the male voices in the room. So today for us, as the It's Not Okay movement, is also about the first phase of our gender equality implementation guide developed for the private sector. This was informed by our research that was done with Prof. Cornet and supported by KPMG. And this gender equality implementation guide for the private sector, I have to say, was also a labor of love. And attached to that, for all the leadership sitting in this room today, there is an online free assessment tool. All you have to do as leadership, go and answer a few questions and see where you are from a gender equality perspective. And in closing, I want to say today that I want to pray. I'm praying today and I'm hoping today, and my call to action to all of the leadership in this room today is go home or go to your organization today and please go and look where you are from a gender equality perspective. If you're not there yet, start your journey. Change those policies and practices, because gender equality can be an economic game changer. And as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible till it's done. And I want to say to all of you, it starts with us. Thank you very much. Steven, back to you.
Tiki's point about a small change later down the line, I mean, a small change, how quickly would it bring? If we do a small change now, how much further forward? How many fewer generations of women and girls would end up not, having proper equality in the workplace? All about that small change at the moment. As Tiki mentioned, KPMG has been doing really important work in all of this. And we've seen that over the last little while. The documents are available, and it really is work that shows you what's actually happening. Ignatius Sehole is the CEO of KPMG, and he will talk now about the responsibility that leaders share, the responsibility that you share as leaders.
Thank you, Stephen. Distinguished guests, good morning. I come from a world of accounting, a world that's driven by numbers. So I sat here and did my notes, which is full of numbers. But I saw Vui also give the numbers. And I also heard Stephen also talk of some of the numbers. So I thought, well, there's my speech gone. And I look at the brochure that we've done here that's going to be distributed to all of you. Also got all the numbers in there. So now here's a new speech. Stephen, you mentioned that politely we invite men so that they can come and talk and engage on this very crucial subject. And you say they don't kind of voluntarily speak because it's probably not in their interest. I beg to differ on that one. Maybe we just don't realize yet how much that is in our interest. A lot of families in South Africa are actually female-led. And there's a lot of children, including boys, in those families. And if we do not empower the woman, we also relegating those children, including the boys who are males, to doom. And therefore, it's important that we actually empower women. It is important that we actually look after our women for our own benefit. I was reading another study, not on gender, but on marriages. And they're saying there, research indicates that married men live longer than unmarried men. They also say that married women live shorter than unmarried women. And tell me that is not in our interest. They make us go to the doctor, they make us do also, because you just want, no, it's fine. No, sweetheart, you have to go to the doctor now. Left to our own devices, we just carry on until, the inevitable happens. You need that positive force in you as men to really self-actualize and achieve all that you can. They are, in all these, as the saying goes, behind every successful man, there's an exhausted woman. And the successful man is the one that takes the glory, not the exhausted woman. My exhausted wife is somewhere here in the audience. It is therefore important for us, Stephen, self-interest, and the sooner we realize that, the better. That when we tackle gender-based violence, when we tackle inequality, it serves us as well. Now, when the pilot study that we do, which is continuing because it's going to grow into a proper study, this pilot actually, the respondents, all of them, acknowledge that employers have a role to play. You know, in particular, private business in South Africa takes on a lot. And we do make a difference in South Africa as corporates if we put our minds to it. Look what happened during COVID. Business stepped up and in actual fact did a lot of good for the country. So if we put as business, if we put our minds to anything, we do make a difference. Therefore, until we as business put our minds to resolving this inequality issue, to resolving this gender-based violence, there's very little that's going to happen. And by the way, all of you that work with women, that are women at your boards, at your excos, I always say, guys, don't hate me for the truth. When women walk into the room, the average IQ goes up. The difference they make in the leadership teams in the different corporates is amazing. And the more we keep them out of the boardroom, the more we're depriving ourselves and our corporates the progress that we could make, the more we limit the innovation that happens in the boardroom, the more we limit the quality of decision making that would happen in that boardroom. And it is said that most of us actually don't realize that keeping women out of the boardrooms, out of decision making, robs us of the advantage of being the best. And a lot of us as men, is actually sad that we don't even realize that we're discriminating against men. I was talking to one CEO, not from South Africa, but from Europe, and we're talking about gender discrimination. Stephen, I do force the topic with men. Not a very comfortable one, but I do force it. And he was saying to me, I mean, it was very serious, in all seriousness. No. In our organization, there's equal opportunity for everyone. We don't discriminate. And I said, okay, that's very interesting. How big is your ExCom? He said, no, there's 12 of us. I said, how many women? He said, 2. But this is somebody who seriously, honestly, from the bottom of his heart, doesn't see anything wrong because they don't discriminate. And I said, but therein lies the problem. And honestly says to me, Ignatius, I've got a wife that I love. I've got daughters that I love. How could I discriminate against women? This is somebody that honestly believes that picture, having a wife that you love and daughters that you love, therefore makes you not discriminate against women. Oh, that would be utopia if that was the case. We wouldn't have these stats that just first 3 months of this year, 969 women were killed in South Africa. First 3 months. That's more than 10 a day. 10 a day. The wives and daughters we love. We kill 10 of them at least a day. 1,485 women reported, at least the ones that have been reported, have been attempted murder. And this is only that we know. And over 15,000 have been assaulted. The wives and the daughters that we love. That's what we do to them. If it was that simple, then it would have been, we wouldn't have this problem. Therefore, today I'm appealing to CEOs, in particular the CEOs not in this room. The overwhelming majority, and not only of JSE, but of all companies in South Africa, is still males. And we, by and large, determine what happens in our organizations. But also, let me tell you, sometimes, Stephen was saying earlier on about not being comfortable. Sometimes you don't want to disturb your comfort because you just want to believe that everything is fine in our organizations. And I ask that just step out of the comfort zone a bit. For those of you that don't know the hierarchy of audit firms, the partners are at the top of the food chain. They are the senior people. I started last year talking to our female partners, separate from the males, just talking to our female partners in the firm that I lead, that I have all these guidance and whatever, and very wonderful. If you ask me, come to KPMG, it's nice. Until I started talking to our female partners. These are the ones that I'm not talking about the managers or the train. I'm talking the ones at the top of the food chain. To say, now talk to me. How are you experiencing being a partner at KPMG? And it was a rude awakening for me. Got out of that comfort zone. And it was only if you actually engage your people and get to know that you'll do something about it. And I therefore encourage all CEOs, take the time. It is important. It's about what happens to your wife that you love very much when it's employed elsewhere. It's about what's going to happen to your daughters that you love very much when they go into the workplace. So do it for you, for my benefit as a male. And therefore, in closing, and Dr. Prof. Mervyn King, I just want to thank you for being here. I mean, you were here last year, you spoke, but you support the cause. Even if you're not a speaker, you still come, and thank you very much. So, CEOs, this is for the benefit of us as individuals. This is for the benefit of our organizations. We will actually progress even more. And importantly, this is the benefit of our country. Don't you want to live in a country where your daughter that you love, your wife that you love, would be able to walk the streets of Sandton and you don't have to worry? But we have to lead that change, because if you don't lead that change, nobody's going to. Thank you very much.
Ignatius, for an accountant, you're very stirring. Is there another career somewhere that we're not aware of? Thank you very much. I feel like I need to go and, I don't know, do something. That's just me. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to move to our fireside chat now, brought to you by Eskom. Sorry, that's a cheap shot. It was men who got that wrong, by the way. And it's an honor for me. I don't get to do this very often for various reasons, because while we do wake up at the same time, we don't get to work in the same space or even the same building. But it's an honor for me to be able to introduce my colleague, Sakina Kamwendo.
Stephen, and according to Ignatius, I think the IQ in the room just shot up now. And this is because women are going to be having the fireside chat. But thank you so much, everybody. And, Vuyo, you said something about how long it's going to take to close the wage gap. And I hate to break it to you, but if we include rural women in that equation, it's going to take 257 years. So generations upon generations, and I don't even know if there'll be humans at that point, but yeah, that's how it is. So before I get into the chat proper, I just want to ask, are there any sports fans in the room? Ah, great stuff. Because, you see, we talk about gender equality, but I just want to bring it home in terms of how this actually plays out. So we're going to the Rugby World Cup next month. So right off the bat, the men have 62 million in the pot that they will share. Great. At the moment, we have the Women's Football World Cup that's currently underway in New Zealand and Australia. So just want to read some of the numbers there to you in terms of how this is playing out. So last year, as you would know, we had the Men's World Cup, FIFA Men's World Cup. The total prize money for that World Cup was $64.4 million. It's just the prize money. That's for whoever wins the tournament. Then you had the second place team, they took home $46.2 million US dollars. So juxtapose that to what's happening in Australia, New Zealand at the moment. The women there, the winning team, they will walk away with $6.6 million. Runners up, they'll take away $4.6 million, right? And I'll have you know that this is a number that has quadrupled since the last World Cup. And then we just completed hosting the Netball World Cup in Cape Town. How fabulous was that? Anyone know what the total prize money was for the Netball World Cup 2023? I'll give you a few guesses. 0. Those girls played their hearts out every day, no prize money. And whatever is left over from the tournament after all the bills are paid, that money is shared between the federations across the world. So when we talk about gender equality, that's what we're talking about. This is where women are in the food chain. So welcome to the fireside chat. And, I must say, like Ignatius, I started out thinking I want to start at one point, and I was driving here, that went out the window. So we'll be talking about other things this morning. So, of course, I'm being joined, she's there already, from Kenya, the Presidential Advisor on Women's Rights in the Republic of Kenya, the Honorable Harriet Chigai. And unfortunately, Professor Olive Shisana is not able to be with us this morning, but Honorable Harriet Chigai and I will try and keep the IQ up in the room. Honorable Chigai, thanks so much and welcome.
Thank you very much.
So we have this very important task of talking about whether the private sector leadership can actually advance gender equality. And I think it's a bit of a rhetorical question because the private sector has an obligation to actually make this happen. But let's just start off with your opening sentiments on this in terms of how businesses can actually do more in terms of advancing gender equality.
Thank you very much. First, allow me to just thank the organizers of this event for inviting our office. And take care, Bernard. I look forward to meet all of you sometime so that we can advance the women agenda. Because in most cases, when we talk about gender-related issues, it's the public sector. But now I'm seeing the private sector has come in big. And having listened to Mr. Ignatius, the CEO of KPMG, I was just smiling and saying, do I really need to make any input in this discussion? Because he has done it for us. And it goes long to actually say that men are the better advocates for women and women-related issues because he has delivered it so well that I almost said, let me just put a full stop. We don't need to continue this conversation. But Having said that, I think the private sector has a big role to accelerate gender equality in the workplace. You know, most cases we talk about public sector, but we also need to appreciate that the private sector are the biggest employers. The private sector are the biggest enablers in terms of job creation. And this is one area that if all governments can work together with the private sector, then we'll move the question of gender and we'll be able to accelerate the issues of gender equality across the globe. Research, and you've also said that for us to accelerate this, if we were to go with how the systems are right now, it will take us more than 100 years to leverage. But the question then is, how do we accelerate this? So for me, I would look at issues of actualization of equal work, equal pay policies. You find that most institutions have policies. Some don't, some do have, but the policies are a checklist. So the question then is, how do we actualize the policies that we have put in place to ensure that issues of gender, issues of women rights are actually leveraged? So that is a very, very, very key entry point. And you know, just like Ignatius has said, and from diverging from what he said, he actually made me believe that women are the real architects of the society. And he went all along to say how women at the workplace work very, very hard. But the question then is, how do we make the smart women within our environment be better than what they are? And how do we support them to ensure that they even make our businesses better? So issues of ensuring that the sexual harassment policies are in place and that they go beyond being on paper is very important. I will use Kenya as an example because it's closer home and to my heart. And globally, you've all seen the question of sexual harassment, especially in the tea sector, where tea for sex has become almost like a daily slogan. So, and these are multinational, companies. So you can imagine if we have laws in place that are not being followed, we have institutional policies that are being breached. How then can we enhance this and ensure that we safeguard the spaces of women? And at the same time, we have high yield, high productivity margins. So working with the governments to ensure that their CSR and philanthropic investments speak matters GBV, because we have taken note that governments cannot do this alone. And that is where we need to plug in and work in hand with the private sector so that we can actualize this. We also need to think about calling out on inequalities through peer-to-peer mechanisms. I like the fact that you've organized this event because I can see all the big boys and big men, women in the room. And mine, I would have really loved to even have this conversation further from here, because you realize that matters to do with peer-to-peer mechanization and mentorship within our workforces and how do we improve ourselves is very important, because peer-to-peer review is also something that is very, very, very good, because people then are open to speak, are open to put across their ideas, and they are open to actualize whatever it is that they want to put across. And then we create a good work environment for everybody. We also need to regulate sexist advertising that enhances stereotypes that subjugate women and girls. And at the same time, we have high yield, high productivity margins. So working with the governments to ensure that their CSR and philanthropic investments speak matters GPV, because we have taken note. I think we are having a technical hit there, and that's where we need to plug in.
Indeed, we do. I think we will
solve
that.
Okay, sorry about that. The other thing that we need to think about is to regulate sexist advertisements that enhances stereotypes that subjugate women and girls. I think this is also very important. We also need to review the power plays in corporate sometimes, victimize, corporate sometimes victimizes the victim in the name of protecting the good name of the said corporates. And then we have to have care work policies. And when I think about Kenya, I will talk about Kenya mostly because we have Safaricom. Safaricom was the first institution that put in the creche. And last week, during our Women in Construction forum, we have actually put in a policy that all government institutions and all new projects that are coming up in terms of offices must actually have a creche for the young mothers. So you see, these are issues to do with policy, but we actually need to actualize them. And from where I sit, with the support of the private sector, I think governments will go far in terms of delivery on matters policy, national policy, and the issue of gender will be well demystified, and it stops being a public sector issue, but we now have to work hand in hand with the private sector to ensure that it's done.
And of course, there is no real impetus, one would say, at the moment, because if you think of what's happening in Europe, so you have the European Union Commission, and they've had a policy in place since 1957. And still today, in the most advanced countries in the world, you have a gender pay gap of 14%. And in South Africa, more like 20 to 35%. And the question is about implementation, because it's all good and well to craft these wonderful policies, but if you can't police them, if you can't implement them properly, what is the point? So what is government striving to do beyond crafting policy?
Exactly. When you look at the biggest challenges that are currently there, you realize that financing is a big problem. Financing for better responses and prevention in terms of structures. We also have issues of survivor-centered approaches that reduce re-victimization and of survivors. Awareness creation of data on the cost of, GBV on the economy. We have issues to do with investment in M&E to monitor policy implementation. And then sustained voices to eliminate harmful practices where children and women are concerned. The biggest problem then is, in terms of us actualizing this, is coordination of all government agencies. And this, if it's well done, together with the private sector, will be able to go a whole long mile. Kenya has recently signed the letter of intent to accelerate matters women economic empowerment, which is also a women's rights issues with World Economic Forum. What that means then is, how do we leverage MSMEs, to be able to, to come up and leverage. And the issues, even when we discuss about all these issues, is purely coordination. How do we coordinate all sectors so that it's all hands on deck? Because if we work in silos, we'll not be able to achieve this within a very short time. So we've realized that we need all hands on deck. Everybody must come to the table, and I'm loving what the organizers of this event have done, because it's part of coordination in terms of how do we bring everybody on board so that we move together, so that the solutions we want to put in place is for everybody, and everybody has a role to play. So coordination then becomes a big issue, and if we can all put our money, and our hands and efforts to ensure that there's proper coordination between the private and public sector, there's proper M&E, so that we can say, we've had these discussions for many years. We have given ourselves timelines and targets that for us to be able to actualize this, all these institutions must be able to give themselves timelines, and they must be able to map out and say, in the next 5 years, matters GBV, matters women, matters equality, we are now at 10%. In the next 5 years, we want to accelerate it and take it to 20%, 30, 40, or 50. Then we'll be able to measure ourselves and say, we've actually done something. But we have all these good discussions, the policies are in place. The issue is just purely coordination, because if we bring everybody on board, we'll be able to leverage and see, these institutions, this is what they're doing, this is the plan. Government, this is what they're doing, this is the plan. So for us to mitigate all the issues that we are discussing now and reduce the time frame in terms of accelerating the solutions that we want to put in place, let us now have M&E. Let us monitor our work. Let us have coordination and engagements beyond our private institutions. And if we do that, I am sure we are actually going to go far in terms of bridging the gaps that are currently in place. Yeah.
Men at the top of that food chain as well, because there has to be more said about accountability. It's all good and well to put the policies in place and to say the companies, will do whatever we think they ought to do, but how do we hold them accountable? And also, what about transparency, Honorable Chigai? Because I think part of the reason why we have these pay gaps ever increasing in some instances, and why we're failing to close the gap is because there's no transparency. I should be able to know what my male counterpart owns. We talk about equal pay for equal work. Why don't we know what each other earns? Why can't I ask for information such as, for example, a desegregated sex information in terms of, in the organization, exactly who earns what at what level? Why is that information not available? And also, just finally, why should we be asked about what I was earning in my previous job when I'm applying for a job at a new firm? Things like that, because that continues to keep women subjugated in the workplace. Honorable Chigai?
Thank you very much. On matters transparency, I think this is also internal policy issues, because I can confidently say in one organization where I was working and I rose the ranks to be the director legal at the time, there was actually a silent policy that women of a certain age can actually not be employed at top management level. Why? It is perceived that within that age is the childbearing age. And that was a silent policy that none of us knew about. But having rose up the ranks, I actually asked, how come at the top management, I was the only woman at the time? And someone whispered and said, you cannot have women managers between the ages of 25 and 35 because, one, they'll be constantly out of work because they have to go and see their children are sick and all that. That is a question of transparency. And we then said, we are now going to have more women, and we shall prove that having a work environment and the policies that have been put in place are actually friendly to all the women. And what we did was to ensure, one, all the women managers are well equipped so that if there is a problem, you can still work away from the office, deliver, and you have all the support that you need. The issue of young mothers as well, because that is the big problem in most corporate entities, because the question is your time versus what you're injecting into the business. So you realize transparency is important, but the policies that we put in place, we need to be able to support all the workers within that institution. And that is where the issue of equal pay, because it's surprising that even in big multinationals, women are still not being given the same salary with their male counterparts. And it's really, really wrong, because you have to put policies and put salary bands that accommodate all. So if institutions have proper policies and they adhere to them and they follow them through, then we'll not be able even to talk about issues of transparency, because the management itself and the institutional mechanism in terms of how do they want to leverage all their staff should be almost automatic. You work for this period of time, you have performed, the next step is for you to move to the next job grade, to the next job pay, and from there you are actually promoted to the next grade. So policies, I know it's important that you put all institutions put in, proper policies in place. The next question after the policies in place is monitoring of the same policies. How are all these institutions performing in terms of the policies that have been put in place and the policies that support all staff, women inclusive? So I think that's the issue that transparency can actually be tackled by proper policies being put in place and proper management and monitoring of the performance of all those policies and review of the policies regularly to actually accommodate the changes in society. When it comes to strengthening of policies, legal and service delivery in terms of infrastructure for the prevention of GBV, there are no emergencies at the workplace. I keep saying that if we plan well, we need to be able also to engage beyond self and beyond these corporates and engage the community, with a focus on everybody, men and boys, women and girls, in negating the cultural biases. All globally, we know matters gender are purely cultural or religious, whichever way we want to look at it. But we need to be able also to break the cultural biases for us to be able to accommodate this. And this is also an area that the corporates can come in big when it comes to CSR activities. How have we fashioned our CSR activities to accommodate the changes in society, to accommodate the societal frock in terms of wrapping it all up and make the society see that the corporates are actually in this with all of us? So I think that is also another area that if we break the biases, we are going to move far. We also need to reframe how we look at gender issues. And allow me to use what has been said earlier by Ignatius, that when you educate a girl, you've educated the whole society. It is also thing I'll say that saying every time I go out there, I feel like I'm at war. So the saying is that behind every successful woman, it's herself, because you have to work with so much courage for you to create the so many changes you wish to create within the society for the benefit of other women. And by virtue of that only, you find that you're in constant conflict. If it's not conflict with self, it's conflict with society. If it's not conflict with society, it's within the work environment that you're in. But the most beautiful thing is that women can wear their confidence. So with the same confidence, then I would ask the corporate entities to embrace the confidence, the courage, the resilience of women who have even gone before us to ensure that some of these changes that we want to put in place are actually actualized. So there's so much that can be done in terms of transparency. It is high time that institutions have their policies published. In Kenya, I would use one institution that I know, all their policies are on their website, Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, where I also worked. And quite a number of the changes we made was to ensure that there is information out there and everybody can be able to get that information. There's nothing as beautiful as having transparent organizations, which can also be rated, pegged on how well they've actualized their promises that they have made. So for me, it's one thing to put a policy in place. It's another thing to ensure that those policies are actually actualized. And it's another thing to monitor the performance of the said policies. Thank you.
And I would imagine, Honorable Chigai, going beyond also just the monitoring and evaluation thereof, we have to be more punitive in how we approach these matters. If you think of the Employment Equity Act in South Africa, and despite that showing us year after year that companies are not compliant, companies have now become so bold that they actually they budget for the fine because it's simply not punitive enough. So unless we hold companies and corporates really accountable to a tune that they actually feel in their bottom line, I don't think we're going to see much change very soon. But you touched on women and, women, the opportunities that would exist for them, but also how they get there. And if you think about it, entrepreneurship and leadership opportunities still exist in the main, mostly to the benefit of men. And do you have any examples of initiatives, of programs in the Kenyan context that you've come up with in order to support women in this regard?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. There's so much that is currently going on. And for me, I would wish to say that the Kenyan government has put women at the center of its economic agenda. And one, I would say we've signed the accelerator to accelerate women MSMEs in this country, and for them to have cottage industries that they can now build their businesses. And we need the private sector to come in big in terms of even training for women MSMEs on financial literacy, on how to invest, how to make money and invest, because I believe the women economic empowerment pillar is the strongest pillar that all governments can leverage on. And the private sector has a big role to play. And in Kenya, I would wish to laud the private sector. KCB Bank has come in big on matters women. We have Equity, though Equity has recently been faulted on equal pay. We also have Safaricom, which is a big champion on matters women in this country. Vodafone is coming in big as well. And from our offices, we've also put initiatives like Wekeza Dada initiative, which we are working together with the Ministry of Trade and Investment, is to ensure that women are well trained, their small businesses are leveraged, and they're able not only to have not only the knowledge of how to make money, but how to start their businesses, legitimize the same, and how to invest. So we would wish to move women from being traders to investors. On the other one, we have also opened up women in the construction industry. And this is one area that we wish also the private sector to come in big, because accountants can really help where the help is needed, especially on training and how to even help women do their bookkeeping, And this is one area that if we can tap all the women in business and build them and form them into institutions that can actually industrialize their countries, we'll be able to go far. Women in construction, our discussions around that is financial accessibility. Private sector can come in big. They can partner with individuals, plow in money and help these women to come up. The biggest question when we talk to banks, they're actually telling us that women are not bankable. The question is why? Women are not able to own property. Why? Culture. So we are now looking at ways which we can be able to have women access finances and leverage even when they do not have the so-called property because of the cultural biases. So this is also another area that if we partner well with the private sector, we'll be able to help so many women to come up. When you look at Kenya, you're actually told that the bankability margins of women is about 2 to 3%. Women in construction is it's less than 13%. So what does this tell you? 1, access to finance. 2, information. 3, knowledge. So if we all put our hands on deck, I think we should be able to work on this. And we are actually working round the clock to ensure that this is done. So Wezeka Dada initiative that is being managed from my office being the patron of the same, we have a target to reach more than 8 million women in the next 4 years. And we are not going to relent. I think we have tasked ourselves to go out there and work. And we call upon all the partners who are willing to join this initiative to come and let us have this discussion so that we can take the women agenda forward. On matters policies, I think this is one key area that as and when we reach out to the private sector, all we ask for is for that goodwill and partnership, because it is one thing to agree, it is another to implement. So even as we have these noble and good discussions, I would wish to see the private sector being the champions of change, because governments can do so much. And at the same time, let's not force the governments to be so hard on the private sector because the policies that are in place are not being followed through. And the best way to do this is for us to have convening of both private and public sector so that we agree and move forward together. So this is the kind of vision I want to see when it comes to how we deal with the private sector, so that it's not one thing to say, but it's also another for us to be able to do it. And we can only do this if we join hands and do this together. So for me, I would wish, even when it comes to shaping the national policies, that the private sector comes in big, as big players, so that we shape these national policies together, because they are also the biggest player within the job market and the labor force, and them being the ones who move economies in most cases, they actually need to play a big role in terms of the policy formulations within the government. So there's a lot that we are doing. I am very excited about the Hustler Fund, which from our end, Safaricom is managing the same, and they're doing a very good job. And I think at this point, I think Safaricom needs to pay me for being their ambassador. Yeah, I think I've talked about Safaricom almost 10 times in my discussion today. But again, just beautiful to appreciate the work that the private sector is doing. So we cannot look the other way. And the beauty about this is that private sector comes in handy. And I'm glad that in Kenya, the private sector has actually taken lead. They don't look at government as competition, but they have come and they have said, we want to work with you. We want to help. How can we do this? And I think that is the kind of spirit that I would wish to see cutting across board. And the understanding that when the laws are put in place, it's really not to muzzle the private sector, but it's because we want to see results. And when you see that governments are really pushing so that they can see results, the question then is, can we then have this discussion so that where the private sector is feeling that it's too much on them, or there's a bit of push and shove, let us have this discussion and see how best we can unlock. And I think that is the module that the Kenyan government has taken. And for me, I would wish to have more of these sessions so that the private sector can feel embraced and they can see where are these gaps, and with these gaps, how can we do this? Because a simple project like Hustler Fund that is purely government owned, I'm sure Safaricom is earning good margins. All I wish to see is that women are in that portal and that the women are actually benefiting big. So I think for me, it's a good thing that the world over now is having these open discussions. And for us, then it's important for us to agree that there's no point to limit the growth of certain individuals, and that is both women, the youth, persons living with disability. If we can have everybody on these discussions, if we can have everybody play in terms of putting policies that can advance the growth margins within our economies, then world over, everybody will be happy. Africa specifically, I think our biggest impediment is our culture. And it is important that for all of us, when we talk about women, we talk about women and girls. We need to ensure that they are all included in decision making. Budgetary allocations, we need to ensure that the voices of women, girls, and persons with disability, and also the youth, their voices are heard because they need to participate in shaping the agenda. We also need to start acknowledging and actualizing that the women's rights issues are human rights. If we have to realize them, then we'll get everything right. And economic empowerment is a women's rights issue. Having more women in leadership positions begins to help change the narrative of gender and gender capabilities. The Kenyan government is putting in place the 2/3 gender accelerator, both in leadership and governance within our leadership front, that is parliament. We are also moving to actualize the same within the public sector. And we are also moving to work with the private sector to ensure that this issue of gender representation in terms of leadership, in terms of management, in terms of how we do our work is actually actualized. And we call upon the private sector to be our biggest champion and our biggest support. I can only imagine if we had 100 Ignatius to speak the way he has spoken today morning, where this world will be in each and every country, you know. So inclusivity and recognizing care work as a contributor to our economy is also very important. So we call upon the private sector, and with so much humility, that let us work together. Let us move this agenda together, and we'll be able to achieve more. And on top of that, I'm sure you're telling me now my time is up. Mine is to really, really thank you all for being patient to listen to me, and for even putting this forum in place and finding it important to actually call governments to sit in with you guys. And mine is to give you the promise that whenever you call upon me, I'll be there for the women of this world. So thank you so much, TK, and thank you for the organizing team, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Harriet Chigai, and she's, of course, Presidential Advisor of Women's Rights in the Republic of Kenya. And I think in closing from my side, I couldn't agree more with those sentiments, but I will absolutely hold you accountable for the things that you have said about the policies in Kenya. So I'll make a round. I'll come back to you on that, because in as much as we hold the private sector accountable, we need to hold our governments accountable as well for what they do and what they don't do. And with that also, I think listening to Ignatius, it is clear that the private sector does understand that its influence goes well beyond the walls of the company. The private sector understands how important they are in driving societal change. So that influence needs to be further leveraged upon. And Safaricom, I was looking around, I was trying to see if they have sponsored anything. So given all the free advertising today, courtesy of the Honorable Chigai, Tiki, I think that's one you need to follow up on, because we need to get paid for that today. But thank you so much, everybody. And I think the parting shot for me is that I hope that we all understand that we are all in this together as advocates of progress. And as Ignatius was talking about his friend, that bias, that unconscious bias, I hope that we can plant a seed today, that when we look at these issues, that we remember maybe today and some of the issues that were raised when we look at our budgets and make sure that they are gender sensitive. And when we sponsor events, when we advertise, let us think about how this impacts women, because that affects all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Gosh, did you feel that? As Sakina got off the stage and I got on, the IQ dropped, right? It happened. It's amazing how quickly it happens. So I hope you'll just tolerate the next few minutes, because it is just men. So, have pity, be nice, we're sensitive. Richard Revett-Carnac is the CEO of SAB. He'll be talking about implementing gender equality through the value chain.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I think my learning today is everyone stood up and said, driving here, they changed their speech. I stupidly had some slides, and now it's going to be hard to change my speech. But what I will do is, I've only got 10 minutes. What I will do is run through these very quickly, because I think having reflected a little bit of what we've talked about this morning, there's obviously a lot more I'd like to say on the topic of conversation. But I think the most important reflection I'd like to start with is changing the belief, and I'm going to talk about what SAB has done in South Africa with regard to gender equality specifically, right? But the starting point for us is a genuine belief that having 50% women, 50% men is the best thing for our company, right? We can talk about lots of other things, and we've done a lot of research. We're a data-heavy company. We understand that most of the time, women are actually much better than men at what they do, regardless of what they're doing, right? We understand there are lots of challenges, structural challenges, be their policy, be their ways of working, that inhibit women from rising up in the company, and we've worked very hard to knock those barriers down. But the underlying belief that it is the right thing to do for the business is really what powers what we do, right? And that for me is a very powerful thing, right? You need to employ people who believe that. I believe that. You can hear that. My entire management team, 30% of which are women, passionately believe that. And whilst it's a journey and we're not there yet, starting at that point, I think, is very, very important. And I think there's an obligation on everyone to communicate that. Our learnings about the genuine benefit that comes when you build diversity within your organization needs to be more widely understood to break down the biases we talked about today. So I think that's just my first reflection. I'll just quickly talk about who we are as a beer company, because I think it's relevant. Beer is natural. It's been around for a very long time. Beer is inclusive. So in South Africa, we have a very inclusive value chain, right? It's about celebrating. Obviously, beer is used to celebrate, but it touches all parts of the country, right? We have thousands of retailers. We support as a beer industry 250,000 jobs, 1 in 66 jobs in the country. And so we touch all parts of the country. And what we do as SAB, as the leader within beer, is super important. We take that responsibility very seriously. And obviously it's local. 95% of what goes into a beer that you drink from SAB is brewed locally, is the hops, the barley is grown locally, the manufacture, the cans and bottles are produced locally, transported locally, and ultimately it's a local business that touches all the provinces and is representative really of what we are as a country. Very quickly on this, 127 years, we have 7 breweries, 1,200 local farmers, 5,700 employees. So this is important. We have direct influence over the equality within our employees. But as I said, the industry supports 250,000 jobs and more than 1 million livelihoods. So what we do at SAB, both within our entire value chain, filters through the entire country. 21 brands and 44 distribution centers, which is not that relevant. So I'm going to talk quickly about colleagues, how we've empowered women, how we've driven diversity within our organization, but also understanding it is about our value chain, right? It's about community, it's about our customers, half of which we would like to be women. Right now, as a beer company, that's not there, right? So we need to think about how we diversify. And our consumers, right? Sorry, our consumers, half of which we'd like to be women, and our customers, almost already half are women, 40% are women today. So I'll just talk about colleagues, and I touched on this at the beginning, right? When we started this journey and we looked, the one thing that's amazing about gender equality in an organization is it's the easiest thing to measure in the world, right? It's simple. You cannot fake the numbers. It is what it is, right? And so if you're doing a good job, you see it in the numbers. If you're doing a bad job, you see it in the numbers. It's that simple, right? And as organizations, as governments, we should hold people accountable against a number that is unbelievably easy to measure and cannot be fudged, right? And that's important for us as an organization, but but also for everyone else, right? We realize the facts, right? In a big head office, it's easier. It's not easy. It's easier to drive towards a 50-50 split in terms of gender within the workforce. In a sales organization where people are in the trade, dealing with liquor traders, often late at night, it's more difficult, right? But it can still be done, and we've demonstrated it can be done in a sales organization. We've been very deliberate about it. We've been very deliberate about creating a safe working environment for our sales reps and the people who work for us. But at the start, the view was this is not possible, right? And we had to challenge those thoughts. We had to break down those barriers. We had to engage our customers, to educate them about how they should behave. What is the correct behavior, right? Creating that safe environment. And it hasn't been easy, but we're on the journey and have made huge strides with some of our top leaders in sales now being women. Supply is the same thing, and here's the example. So in our breweries, again, traditionally a male environment, right? Not a lot of that physical labor, but hot environment. You work very hard, long hours, 24-hour breweries that run all the time. Very difficult in theory for women to be in that environment. But again, we had to break those barriers down. And I'm very proud to say we now have 3 very senior women leading the organization. They've come through the organization. We've been very deliberate about our policies, our leadership programs. We have our Prospecting Brewery in Durban and our brewery in Newlands being run by female plant managers. Our head of brewing quality is a female, having grown through the organization. So it can be done. We have production lines producing Brutal Fruit, which is our product targeted mainly at women. They're often run exclusively by women and almost always at higher efficiencies than other lines within the organization. So it's something that can be done. It takes time, but you need to be very deliberate about it, and you need to believe it's the right thing to do, which is what we do. Talk quickly about our customers. The reality is we talked about women-led businesses, the importance of women in our society. 40% of our customers are female, right? And they're often supporting big families, putting their families, their relatives through school. We've doubled down on this. We support them through deliberate business training, through incentive programs, through ensuring that they have the tools to succeed, because we believe that this is a very important part of our business. Consumers, very quickly, I touched on this. Obviously, beer is a traditionally male product. We've had to diversify. We would like more females to drink beer, but that's proven to be a long-term battle that we're not winning. And so we chose deliberately to diversify our brands, to target females, to be more inclusive. And in part of that communication, the great thing about great brands is that you have the power to speak to the whole country again. Through Calling Black Label. Calling Black Label has taken on a no excuse campaign and has taken on GBV, gender-based violence, deliberately, right? It's won awards for its campaigns. It is training women and men. It's providing GBV centers, right? As a brand, it's a very powerful voice. And some people might say Calling Black Label and GBV, that doesn't sit comfortably. And it doesn't, right? It was a big decision for us as an organization to make, to say, we are going to be very deliberate about using this brand to elevate this topic of conversation. And it has been amazingly successful, and we are 100% committed to continuing. And then slightly lighter, but really, Brutal Fruit in this campaign is about you belong. Brutal Fruit's about saying, everyone belongs, right? You don't have to be the perfect supermodel drinking amazing champagne, right? We created a product that's for everyone, right? And I just want to show, hopefully it works, the advert that represents this.
You don't own me. I'm not just one of your many toys. You don't own me. Don't say I can't go with other boys. You don't tell
so finally, I think just on communities, it's, we talked about our value chain. The SAB Foundation, a very successful foundation. I believe one of the most successful corporate foundations, very biased, but has invested more than R500 million, right, into SMEs with a specific focus on women-owned SMEs, 70% of those, right? Again, ensuring that we uplift our communities because it's such an important part of the country. And so just very quickly in conclusion, I see my time is also up. I think I was asked to give a challenge to the other CEOs. And my challenge is in line with the start. I mean, I think it's completely within our control to drive this agenda, to understand the challenges we face, to knock those barriers down within our organizations. We can measure it, as I said. It's very simple to measure. Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the wrong thing? Discussions around 130 years, 200 years, right? Yeah, if you can change the percentage by 1% a year, that's 50 years. If you've got zero, right? And hopefully most of us don't have zero. So it's completely within our control. We need to take it seriously, and we need to honor our commitment to fix the problem that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, give me that. Thank you very much indeed, Richard, and a very powerful voice from a very powerful company as well, if I may say. Well, as you know, Steve Kipton-Ness is from a most prominent non-sponsor, Safaricom, and he will speak now.
Just because he's my namesake, thanks for throwing me under the bus. And thanks for setting us up with looking around for sponsorship. But we have Tiki to blame. We might remedy that next time. So we're going to take the IQ in the room even lower. And I'm sorry that I'm the second gent to come and speak here today. I do have some written remarks because I didn't drive here. I walked here. And I didn't get, sorry, are those mics supposed to? Okay, I'm sorry. So I didn't get any reflections on my walk from the hotel here, so I'll stick to my written remarks. I'm not as good at extempo as Mr. Ignatius. It's a pleasure to meet you. Safaricom is a company from Kenya, and we are a technology company. By the way, you could cue the video, just set that up in the next 10 seconds. So for us, it's a privilege to be here to speak about, and for me as a gent, to speak about women's rights and what we are doing and the story in Kenya. And I'm grateful to Honorable Chigai for the remarks that she made about where we have come from as Safaricom. It's been a very deliberate journey. If you could play the video, please, just to tell you who we are about as Safaricom.
Gender equity is an essential element of today's world. At Safaricom, we believe that gender equity is not just a desirable attribute, but a critical component of sustainable business. We are deliberate in creating an inclusive organization where women can thrive and reach their full potential. Over the past few years, Safaricom has implemented a series of initiatives to attract, develop, grow, and retain more women in the organization. We are currently at 50-50 gender balance across the organization, with 40% at leadership level. We believe by attracting and empowering more women in leadership, we can create a more diverse and inclusive organization that is better equipped to tackle the challenges of the future. But it's not just about the numbers. We also strive to create an inclusive environment that fosters growth and development in our business and the community we serve. Gender equity is not only good for women, it is also good for society and the economy.
Gender equality in the workplace, first, is a critical imperative for our business. What we did is, first, it's who we want to be. So we want to be a purpose-led technology company by 2025. Purpose means transforming life, but in there is also leave no one behind. And most importantly, we should also reflect the societies in which we operate. So we've said we want to have gender parity as a whole. So 50% of our staff are female. We've also looked at women in senior positions. And we set a target, which I'm so excited that we will be delivering by 31st of March 2023, of 40% of our workforce at F+, so senior managers, to be women.
We believe in giving back to the community by empowering the next generation of female leaders to ensure we leave no one behind.
To inwane a word there is Swahili for let's lift each other up, where you saw the hands. It's a hand of someone up there lifting someone down there. And for us at Safaricom, as you saw in the video, we're about transforming lives. And one thing that we do in terms of transforming lives through our foundations is in health, because for us, maternal and child health is a really big deal. And so we spend quite a bit of our foundation funds in building maternity facilities to uplift the lives of women in some of the counties that have the highest mortality rates for women and children. Our tagline in terms of diversity and inclusion is embrace my world. And as you did see across the business, we're at 50%, which is good. That number should still grow. And so it's not really about equity anymore. It's really just about plain old equality, making sure that those numbers creep up, and it's very deliberate. It's really, really gratifying that in our senior management, we're at 40% and trying to move that number, intending to move that number in this financial year to 42%. It's been a very deliberate journey of recruitment. I mean, one of the things that we do is we hold managers accountable. I was recruiting about 6 months ago for one of the department heads, and it was about getting a list of names from the recruiter, and I said, no, there are not enough women. I need you to go out there and dig some more, because I could have gone with the names that I got. There was probably about 20% women and more men, but taking that action to say, because I'll be held accountable by the HR team, get me more women, keep digging, because there's women out there who have the qualifications. And indeed, I did recruit a woman as the head of that department. If I hadn't asked for more names, that wouldn't have happened. And that's one of the things we hold our managers accountable to making sure you can dig and look for more names. In this regard, we also try to include, we have deliberately included women within the category of persons with disabilities, because we realize that if you don't take that approach, particularly with our suppliers, then you'll have a lot of male suppliers who qualify, who meet the bar. And one of the more interesting stories for me in terms of growing the percentage of women suppliers in our business, and we're at about 10% right now. We're trying to move that to 30%, which is sort of the government minimum. There was a lady who was involved in media. She worked for one of the media stations, used to come and do stories on technology. And when we set out the challenge and said we wanted more women to get into business, I mean, she trained as a journalist in school, but she set out there. We supported her, in little bits and ways, and she was able to set up a company that does fiber rollout, that does fiber maintenance, that does base station rollout. I mean, it's so amazing that she's not in technology, but she sort of got into that space, and she's led the charge, inspired quite a number of women who are now in the technology space. So we didn't want women just supplying pens and paper, sort of the low end of the spectrum. One of the things that we do is to conduct very specific tracking of how women are being employed in the different facets of the business. And in doing that, we have specific programs for our women in management, for women who are not in management, in terms of trying to inspire them to get into management. So we have a women in leadership program, we have women in technology. We also have a lean-in circle where women can gather together and spur each other on, whether it's in terms of qualifications, in terms of inspiring yourself to get to apply for that job that you might think you don't qualify for. And some of those unconscious biases are reflected in the interview process, because whereas you have a certain band for purposes of salary for that position, many times over the years of my life, and I spent quite a number of years as a lawyer in private practice, you will find women coming in, and if you ask candidates, men and women, what their expected salary is, 9 times out of 10, the woman will quote a figure that's 10% lower than what's available. And the unconscious bias shows up when, you might give her the offer because she's saving you money as an employer. But when you walk away from that intentionally by saying, no, we have a lot more space in this. I mean, she qualifies, meets the technical qualifications. Why should she have a lower pay for the same category of work? And that's something in Safaricom that we have striven to completely eliminate, so that a woman at the same categorization of work will get the same amount of pay. We're seeing a lot of women coming in. Thank you. Because of our Women in Technology mentorship program, we're getting so many women and girls from university applying to join us as engineers. Again, in a traditional space where we had few women climbing up masts to go and do that engineering work, we're having a lot more women coming in and making it clear that there's no barrier to women being able to get into that space that unconsciously was left for males. So we have also, to try and support our suppliers, partnered with banks like Citibank, ABSA, a couple of local banks, KCB, Equity, to provide step-up financing for women who want to do work for us. I mean, if you want to bid for work in the technology space, inevitably it's very high capex required. And so we have a program specially targeted at women that allow them to get the financing that obviously would allow them to reach out and roll out fiber, set out those base stations, do the fiber maintenance. And for us, that is bearing fruit, because we're seeing a lot of women getting into that space. So for us, the 4 things that we sort of focus on to make sure that women are front and center in the conversations is through building an inclusive culture, making sure that the culture is deliberate in terms of how people think about how men think about women in the workplace. We also hold our managers accountable for the hire. I can see the side eye from Stephen. We also make sure that the compensation is fair. You wouldn't get a lower salary just because you're a woman, as well as promotions, opportunities for promotions. But intentionally as well, have diversity and inclusion programs that will ensure that in every facet of the business, we can actually have a more diverse workforce showing up. So for us as Safaricom, it has given us very visible brand equity, and we really find the value of that IQ height when we actually have more women in the room. I certainly see that. I mean, when Ignatius said that, light bulbs were going on in my head, because I figured, yes, absolutely. You also get better dressed men when women are in the room. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Look, I mean, maybe us men have lower IQs, but the Steves do all right, I always think. We are going to move along as quickly as we can. Richard Firth is the CEO of MIP Holdings. Will be talking about the gender shift in the mind.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Tiki. I'm the CEO, but I'm actually a programmer. So I see iPads and phones, but I've got a piece of paper. How funny is that? I want to start off by saying I'm truly disappointed that Professor Shisano is not on the stage. They didn't pitch. It goes to the heart of the problem that we've got in our country. Because as business, we're looking to government to guide and help, but we're not taking responsibility ourselves. So in 2014, while implementing MIP's PPP reporting and discussing our social responsibility strategy, we came to the conclusion that we had 3 fundamental issues. There were no black software engineers, there were no women engineers, and gender-based violence was a big issue if we wanted to get 50% women in our company. And programming is a career where your brain has to sit very deeply in what you're doing. And one little distraction, you can't work. You don't work. So to deliver the strategy, we're not just trying to tick a BBBEE box. Yet, when we were putting the plan together, we wanted the points. We needed the points. You know, there's this dual strategy. You actually want to deliver something, but you've got to report on stuff to the Department of Labor, etc. And we're not a billion-rand company. We're a private company. We're not listed. But yet we take all of these things seriously. We concluded that our solution for the lack of software coding skills, whether for black people or females, was the same. We needed to grow the base. We decided to start an internship that developed people with real coding skills. There were two problems. Not everyone has the intrinsic ability to code. It's not something that you just go to university or wherever and learn the skill. You're actually born with it. And then if we just went out and, published a thing, we need people to teach how to program, in South Africa we would have been swamped with hundreds and thousands of application forms. So we used our skill, and we wrote a little riddle. Ooh, sorry, I need this little clicker button. See, I'm getting all the tech disappearing. We wrote a little riddle that we put onto pamphlets and digitally, and we distributed them into universities and schools around the country. And our small HR team even went to rural schools and universities and sent that out. And the real thing was that if your brain wanted to fathom that out, actually we could be interested in you, right? And if you did solve the riddle, it took you to a website. And that website was quite a techie-looking website. But all it is a game. And if you play that game, the game gets harder as you go along. 21 levels, takes about 2 hours. And while you're doing that, we've got your ID number, and we know how long it's taking you to play the game and how well you're playing the game. But what you've done is you've written a little program for us. Without any skill, we can see whether your brain works the way we want it to work. And once you've done that, we then ask for your contact details. So the puzzle worked really well for us. We currently have about a 98% success rate on the people who come through the game. Every 3 months, we have about 12,000 South Africans playing the game. Unfortunately, we're a small business. So of the 12,000 people, we select 100 to interview, and 35 are employed every 3 months. They get given a salary before they start training. We put them on the internship for 3 months, and they get a very competitive salary, and they become an excellent programmer. Thank you. 95% of the people who've been through the program are black or women. And today, we've had 500 people come through our program, all earning an average of upwards of 30,000 Rand a month. Yeah. Sure. Emotional, huh? We still have a problem because there are not enough females, right? Females don't want to get into IT. So that's our next challenge as a community, to try and get more females. And all the things are here today. 550 of our people work from home. Can you imagine you're pregnant? Can you imagine you have to look after your kid? What a perfect job. Whether you work at 3 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, we don't care. We're just looking for the outcome. So in 2019, we then turned our attention to gender-based violence. Gender-based violence has a negative impact on skills development, productivity, tourism, our economy, health systems. Even you say tourism. Why? A quote from the World Population Review, a population travel advisory website. South Africa is the most dangerous country in the world for solo female travelers. How damaging is that for a country that actually needs tourism? It's one of our base things. If mining collapses, the next thing that's actually going to save us. And that's what's in the international community. Actually, if gender-based violence was a listed business, because we're here, first time I've been here, it would be a roaring trade. It would be fighting for the limelight from the likes of Naspers, Sasol, and Standard Bank for being the biggest company on the JSE. Gender-based violence just keeps on growing every year, like the perfect annuity business. Sure, sorry. With respect to those organizations that are trying to address the issue, we have 16 days of activism. We walk the talk, we have Women's Day, and we're getting so good at it, we've got Women's Month. But it just gets worse. You know what Albert Einstein says? Yeah? The proverbial definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It's not working, guys. We need to learn that unless there are personal consequences to the perpetrators, then we really have no reason to stop. 11 women killed. 17 attempted rapes, 118 rapes occurred every day in the last 3 months of 2023 in South Africa. It is a crisis. Another reason for MIP selecting gender-based violence are those things that I spoke about already. A programmer cannot work or is in fact completely non-productive if one's mind is not 100% committed to the code or program that one is writing. Slides show that a programmer only achieves flow after 25 minutes. Flow is a positive state where a person's mind is fully immersed in energized focus. It takes 25 minutes to get there. One little distraction, you're gone in seconds. You start again. So you are completely unproductive if that's your state of mind. And what percentage of our women in South Africa have this abuse going on? We commissioned a consulting company called Sieka to find us an existing organization in gender-based violence space that had a track record, that had history, and that they were actually making a difference on the ground. Also, we did not just want to donate money, we wanted to use our expertise, like we did with the game, to help do things. So, new organizations are being created all the time, leading to further fragmentation and inefficiency in the gender-based violence space. For example, when the well-intentioned Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation wanted to make a contribution, the foundation started a new organization. There were already some making positive impacts in the industry. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and BMW handed over 5 cars for the use of departments focusing on gender-based violence in February 2020. There was one of the cars. Look at the name on the door, Stop Gender-Based Violence. That's what it was for. 4 of the cars went to non-gender-based violence organizations, and one of the cars was recently found in a warehouse with just 348 kilometers on the clock. So we're giving money, but we're not following up on the money. Don't follow up, so it doesn't actually help. Siaka recommended one very special NPO to MIP. It was called Tears, and it was founded by Mara Glennie. Just put your hand up, Mara. I know you're in the room here somewhere. Where's Mara? Hello, Mara. A gender-based violence victim herself. And she took her experience and created an organization. They look after, back in 2019, they looked after 88,000 abused people every month. I didn't believe the number. They run a skilled workforce that manage antiretroviral treatment for HIV because HIV is preventable. Morning after pill to avoid unwanted pregnancy from the rape. Antibiotics for possible sexually transmitted diseases, blood tests to test for date rape drugs in the blood system, internal medical examinations to see and treat the extent of the victim's injuries, access to a medical facility that issues J88 forms for court purposes, linking victims with shelters, and where needed, child-friendly facilities. Can you imagine being raped and need to think about all of those things? Yeah. So, all the Tears work is captured on paper. No matter how efficient the process is, paper will always be inefficient in our digital world. Mara told me we obviously need donations, but donations don't yield big dividends. We need partnerships. So we decided there's our organization. And MIP recently received a global recognition from international research consultancy Gartner, where MIP's platform was one of only 15 international fintechs was only one of 15 international fintechs recommended for Gartner Market Guide for Policy Administration Systems in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We have large companies like Sanlam, Hollard, PPS, Capitec, and Investec running this platform. We use that platform to digitize that process over there. So now we've got unique things like we can capture victim details, perpetrator details, police officer details. Can you imagine a world where we can tell a woman you don't want that police officer? They've never arrested or put anyone away for the job that they do. We finally have the system. It's taken nearly 3 years, and with that system, we've also put a massive database together where we can collect the information in real time and report in real time. I see Prof. Cornet is here, and she's used some of that data now to start some studies in terms of getting real information about perpetrator and what takes place and all the processes that they manage. But I'd like to say thank you very much. Tiki, thank you. Just from our side, a shout out. Take your money and give it to NPOs that are making a difference, that are out there already. Don't try and start new ones, not helping the industry. And there's Tears, there's Tiki's business. Put the money in there. Let's consolidate. And I think there's an opportunity now because we have a system. It's paid for. We're not asking for someone to give us money to build a system. We have got a system now where we should be consolidating this whole industry onto one platform where industry can manage government. Because as you see today, they didn't come to the discussion. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I thought that was really enlightening and I think very energizing in its own way, if I may say. We're going to change format slightly, so from now on you'll be able to ask. We'll try and squeeze it time-wise, but you'll be able to ask questions of the speakers. Peter Scholz is a KPMG partner and Africa ESG lead, and he'll be talking about a perspective towards GBV and a response from employers.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Is this working? That's it. Earlier this year, I was presenting to a group of senior leaders in one of South Africa's large mining companies. And I was presenting the outcomes of a social impact assessment that we did in a community around a mine that they were planning to start up. And one of the more concerning findings out of that assessment was that the tribal leadership in that area sent an instruction to all the unwed women in the community to say, you will not apply to any of the jobs advertised by the mine because these jobs have to go to the men. Now, this was done even though the mining company, from their first engagement with the different community forums, made it very clear that 50% female employment on this mine was non-negotiable for them. Now, after I presented to them this finding, we actually had quite a long discussion about all the different options of how to deal with this and the risks associated with these options. Now, by far, the least risky option, at least from a financial and a delays perspective, would have been just to relax this 50% employment requirement and to, over time, educate the community and grow the representation of females in the workforce. But when we finished, the CEO looked at his team and he simply said, we will not do the wrong thing because the right thing might be difficult to do. We will educate the community now. So why am I telling you this story? Firstly, because it is institutionalized. Gender inequality such as this, that is one of the key drivers for gender-based violence. But also because the example set by this CEO is exactly what South Africa needs from all of our leaders, whether you are in the public or in the private sector. If our leaders do not lead the charge against gender-based violence, we will not end this pandemic. And I want you to be under no illusion Gender-based violence in South Africa is a pandemic. You've seen the figures. Let me contextualize it quickly for you again. First 3 months of this year, on average, 11 women killed every day. 17 more are the victims of attempted murder, and 118 women raped on average every day in this country. These are our colleagues and our workers. They're our cousins and our nieces. They're our sisters and our grannies, and they're our daughters and our mothers. Now, because we felt so strongly about the health and safety of our employees, we at KPMG started to develop our own internal mechanisms to help fight the GBV fight. But as we were busy with this process, we realized there's actually preciously little supporting material to help employers to do the right thing and to assist employers on how to do it. So based on this realization, we then decided to conduct this pilot study that we did. Now, let me give you some context on the study before I give you the findings. So we started somewhere in June, we ended beginning of August, and we utilized 3 different mechanisms to source the data. Some companies completed online surveys. Others were kind enough to allow us to have focus group discussions where we engaged with a number of the employees, and others engaged with us through qualitative surveys that we conducted with representatives of the company. Now, overall, we engaged with 18 large employers in South Africa that represents about 250,000 employees in the country, and to try and make the sample as representative as we possibly could for this pilot study, we also tried to cover as many sectors as we could. You can see the sectors on the board there. You will all get this handout when you leave. They're in here as well. So, what were the trends that we found in this study? Let me start with some of the more surprising ones, to us at least. First one is that most of these companies actually didn't even have the basic gender equality mechanisms in place. Only 22% of these companies had actually done a gender audit. And very interesting to us was that most of the respondents that we engaged with believed that men in their company actually are playing a pivotal role in addressing the gender inequality. Now, this is, for instance, one of the areas where we're going to expand a little bit as we continue with the study to test, firstly, whether this trend holds true as we expand the sample, but also whether this is a trend just in senior management, which were the key demographic of the respondents, or whether this actually does infiltrate into the depths of an organization, and especially that middle management level, where the real culture of an organization is driven from. Half of the companies have not yet done any formal communication about gender-based violence, and less than half actually believed that their employees could freely and safely speak up about gender-based violence and gender discrimination in their companies. Now, some of the more expected trends, although the quantum did surprise us, was most companies have insufficient gender-based violence awareness training. Most companies don't have gender-based violence support groups. This is slightly offset by some of them luckily having general employee support programs. Most companies had no or insufficient gender-based violence policies, something similar in safety plans. Most of the respondents didn't have a working knowledge of the supporting legislation. And again, in your handout, you will see a summary of what that is. But what did give us quite a bit of hope is that half of these companies were already busy addressing gender-based violence outside the confines of their company, mostly through their corporate social investment spending. Right. Most companies, actually all but one, express the need for something like a gender-based violence standard that could support them in this drive to fight this pandemic. But then the two trends that gave us the most hope was that every single one of them expressed the willingness and the desire to collaborate across sectors to come up with the best possible solutions to assist employers to help fight this fight. And not only did they want to be part of the solution, every single one of them believed that it is the duty of employers to play a key role in us addressing this pandemic. Now, I'm hoping from the bottom of my heart that it's not just these 18 companies that are wanting to do that, but that all of you sitting here today want to be part of this solution. And if you do, please scan the QR code, put in your information, and we will contact you to become part of this expanded study where we're going to end with a gender-based violence standard that will enable all employers across South Africa to do the right thing and to fight actively against gender-based violence. The QR code's also in the handout if you want to do that afterwards. Let me conclude. In 2005, Madiba said the following words. Now, he said it in the context of ending poverty, but they do seem especially applicable also to what we are talking about today. He said, sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. And of course, the task will not be easy. But not to do this would be a crime against humanity. If we do not stop gender-based violence, it will be a crime against humanity, because we know that when women can bring their best and their true selves, all of society thrives. Because women are not only the heart of society, they're also its foundation.
Thank you very much, Peter. Really appreciate it. We are going to move on very quickly.
Cool.
Thank you. Sylvester Chauke, one of the stories that's really important is to try and understand the human story, why it matters to us as a human, and also as a communicator. Stories really matter. Someone who understands the power of that. He's the founder of DNA Brand Architects, is Sylvester Chauke. Someone I've been following for many years, but never actually met.
Oh, yes. So today. Thank you very much. My goodness, yeah. A lot to do, for sure. Thank you very much. I think this morning has been really powerful, a lot of great insights. But I think more exciting is what can happen after this, which is really quite cool. So I've been given 10 minutes to talk about my story. And my story really does talk about, equality, at the center of it. I think the conversation around us being able to work together as a society for the betterment of all of us is something that is quite important for all areas of business. So I'll do my best to talk about my story in 10 minutes. Now, what's always been clear is that we do live in an unequal society. I think many of us have been able to experience this. I think driving to work every day, you see it. And so when it comes to the subject matter of empathy, it's weird that living in a country like ours, how is it that empathy is not something that we practice a lot in the businesses, in the areas that we work with, when we are surrounded by so much inequality, not just about gender, but about economic participation, equal opportunities, so many different challenges that we do face. And so our ability to empathize with people is paramount in my mind. It's everything. Our ability to be able to understand people, not based on what we think we should be feeling or they should be feeling, but based on what they feel, is something that is quite critical. And so that's really where I'm going to hinge my conversation. Now, to know and understand where I want to land, it's probably better to kind of know where I come from. For a while, growing up, I was that kid, the one who could belt all Britney Spears and Madonna lyrics. Very, very colorful, a dancer, very chacharach. And I think generally, my family would always say, she's wena, I wena waslupa man, very, very often. And I was that kid. And I think that ultimately, I knew that I was different. But I think society also just reminded me quite often that, you are quite different. And so when I go to varsity, it was quite interesting for me because I think as I grew up and as I found myself, I continued to be that theater kid because I could hide behind, kind of dealing with the issues of my sexuality. Because if you're a creative kid, you can almost, kind of live in society without being attacked. Of course, homophobia was rife where I grew up. I grew up in Soweto. And I think my ability to be able to kind of navigate this, I just want to be included. I just want people to see me for who I was something that was quite important for me. So when I finished varsity, I understood that, I was going to get into the world of work, and dealing with my sexuality or facing my sexuality at work was going to be very difficult because I knew that I was walking into an environment where I probably have to be really, really brilliant, or I need to just really make sure that my sexuality doesn't become a thing that stops my career and stops me from moving forward. So I was quite nervous, as you can imagine. And as you can clearly see, I'm very camp. And even when I try to do the butch thing, I end up, looking like a clown. So I had nowhere to hide, so I couldn't really, exit out. I just had to really just walk into these environments and try as much as possible to be who I was. And I was very blessed because when I started working, I joined some of the most exciting brand agencies in the world. I worked for FCB and Ogilvy and DDB, and I think that's when I started seeing and I met leaders in the business who actually really did appreciate diversity, people that were different. And I think that's really where, for me, I realized, okay, maybe this thing might not be too much of an issue, right? And maybe you could say I was lucky because I was working in an advertising environment, so maybe that's allowed in a sense of diversity. But that's not really true. In fact, Adweek released a study last week that says that in 2021, 73% of people that work in the advertising industry were male. Okay, and they did the study now again, of course, looking at 2022, 90%. Now, even more interesting is that of that, about 78% are almost like, black people in management. But in 2022, about 97%, well, actually it was less people who are of diverse backgrounds within the industry. So we're really not moving forward as much as we should be moving forward. But I think meeting people and meeting leaders in organizations that understand diversity is something that was really quite helpful for me. Then I moved to work at Nando's. I led Nando's marketing for a number of years. And I think at Nando's, I also met CEO, the EXCO team, men and women who really did appreciate diversity and inclusion. So I really felt seen, and I felt that my voice did matter. And yes, I'm colorful and fruity and as whatever you want to say, but the reality of it was that wasn't a problem. It was actually a really powerful thing because it really allowed, my ability to do what I need to do well to kind of get in there. Then I went to lead MTV Networks Africa as Director of Marketing and Communications. And of course, I met more leaders. I met the CEO, of course, the Vice President of the company, the EXCO, who also really felt that diversity was a good thing. So you could say that I was lucky, because I know that many, many people, many professionals in the industry don't have this kind of experience. You know, they normally, generally, constantly undermined, and that's something that is a challenge. And I now lead one of South Africa's large PR agency of the year for 3 years in a row. And what has been important for us is based on the leaders that I've been able to have the privilege of working with. I do think that diversity and empathy is a really important thing. 70% of our team are female. Our exco is 60% female. And we pay equal. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a male, the work is the same. So I think for me, that was quite important in what we're able to do as businesses, and particularly as small businesses, to be able to make a difference in the communities that we work within. And of course, for me, my ability for these environments to allow me to be who I was really where the magic of that work was, and where the impact actually did happen. And it's true. All leaders and all of you in this room have to juggle quite a bit, as leaders of organizations, beyond just the technical aspect of the job itself. You know, you've got to manage how does our environment look and how do our business go. But one of the biggest questions for me was, why is it that it's hard for people to have empathy in business? Why are we so hard living in a country like that we are in? Why is it so difficult not to be able to look at someone and think, how can we help them? Why is it so comfortable that we can be almost oblivious to some of the challenges that we are facing in our businesses? And it's something that I find really, really challenging. Yes, there's these invisible strings that are doing everything to almost like suppress anyone, whether you're a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, or whether you're a woman, a black woman. You know, there's always these invisible strings that are almost adamant. Look at what's happening in Uganda today. Look what's happening in Ethiopia today. You know, as a member of the LGBTIQ plus community myself, I just think, how would I even be able to wake up in a country like that? Or work in a business that doesn't really allow me to be who I am? So these invisible strings are a key area and a key problem that we are facing. But maybe you could say that it's a case of good eggs, good omelette, or bad eggs, bad omelette. But the truth is, it really is about the quality of leaders in those businesses. Because all these things are happening and they're supported by people. So yes, we are hoping that we've got more good eggs in this room to be able to really get much better output, because it's the output that I think is really where the magic is going to be. Not so much necessarily about some of the things that we speak about, technical things around policies. The reality is that the barriers are real and they're very much reinforced every day. I know we're sitting in here in this room as a small number, but I mean, out there, businesses are running, things are happening. You know, women are being suppressed, LGBTIQ plus community members are being attacked in businesses. So all those things are the reality that we are facing. The barriers are there, and I think for us to be able to make an impact, we need to work much harder in being able to really manage some of these barriers. There's a lot of fear. Do you agree? It's really the fact that I'm nervous about going to the office because I'm worried that people might think, oh, this gay guy, what is he going to do here? It's something to deal with, right? Because I'm not even talking about the technical work. I'm just talking about being accepted for who I am. And it's something that, over time, we realize that there are a lot of women who leave themselves in their cars when they walk into their businesses because they kind of can't say much, or they are not given enough opportunities and those kind of things. Many people are not having this glorious experience of corporate. And many corporates in South Africa, where you expect diversity to grow, are probably the worst places to work. Very much often, it is really about sort of like the grandness of those organizations, but not so much about the impact that those organizations are creating for the people that they work with. So, of course, business is afraid. I must say, business is afraid to act. They say a lot of things, but they're afraid to act, because something like equal pay can be changed. Don't you agree? Something like diversity and inclusion in terms of how many women do we work with in our exco, that can be changed, can't it? I mean, those are numbers that can happen. Those are the changes that can be created, but they're not happening quick enough, and that's really the challenge. So, yeah, maybe the subject of honors of diversity and inclusion can feel a little something like this, where we're like, yet another conversation about diversity and inclusion, or yet another opportunity, yet another, donation to be made. But the reason why this is so is also because not enough action is really happening and not enough change is actually taking place. But in true South African style, there's always hope. Something that's also our problem, right? Because we're always sort of like resilient. So we can handle it. But it's a problem. Because ultimately, the reason that we all invest time in having conversations like today is because we all believe in a much better output, right? We believe we can change our society, we can change our businesses, and I think that's why I'm encouraged, because there are men like Ignatius who are committed to driving our businesses forward. So one of the things that I've learned, and I'm just as I'm about to close, is just to talk about some key things I think could be of help. We need to be very careful that we're not just building, beautiful business buildings, but actually the toxicity of most corporates is a problem. And quite often the issue is that people aren't honest. If you go to anyone and say, how was I today? They'll say you were fantastic, but actually that you were not. And that's something that's quite challenging. So as much as we're spending time and effort in our businesses and making sure that our companies look good, let's spend enough time also making sure that internally that there's that diversity and inclusion that's taking place. Are you with me? The second thing is really around courage behind the keyboard. Many people have courage behind the keyboard, but if you ask them, you're always going to get, and that's why when Ignatius was saying, going to the people in the team and asking them, how are you experiencing this? It's the honesty that he needed to get in order for him to make a change. So oftentimes there's not enough honesty. People like to talk behind the keyboard, but when you are really facing issues where you've got to face some tough conversations, is something that doesn't happen. And my suggestion is, and we do this at our office, and I advocate for everybody to start an honesty squad. Question your companies. Be honest. So what we do in the company, we say there's an honesty sort of room where we go, in this room today, we're only going to talk about not just the nice things, but the tough things. So you only can bring tough things in that space. Please set up honesty squads in your companies, in your teams, so that you are able to really get the truth of what's happening in your organization. The second thing, or the next thing, is really around the fact that it's not just about the black silo, the white silo, the LGBTI plus community silo, or disability, or the disabled silo, etc. It's actually about integrating society completely. We can't just fight for, women. We've got to fight for everybody, because collective wisdom is really where it's at. And then we've got to dial up on compassion. If there's anything I ask, please, can we just dial up on compassion? It's cool to love at work. It's cool to care at work. Because I think we've built businesses. Because I think we've built businesses with this idea that business is tough, hardcore, it's ruthless, cutthroat. But business doesn't have to be cutthroat. Business can be really encouraging and can be a place of care. So these are some of the men that I'd like to celebrate today. Men in particular who have been able to create spaces for someone like me, a gay man in business, to succeed with regardless of my sexuality, but also who also open lots of doors for women in particular to be great, whether it's Sipho Maseko at Telkom or Dominic Sewela at Barloworld, and my boss, who I love so much, Robbie Brosen at Nando's. Men who can be compassionate, can be kind, can be empathetic, and who can really bring that conversation of inclusivity onto the room. So there's a misconception that men don't do it, but actually men do. There are men who care. There are businessmen who want to see diversity and inclusion thrive in those businesses. So in closing, I don't care and I don't want to debate this subject of equality. I don't debate equality. Equality is not something that I'm going to debate and try to convince people that we must be equal. But what I'm going to say is that equality is the only way. It makes sense for business, it makes sense for us. And in the words of my fearless leader, Robbie Brosen, who led me at Nando's, who used to say that what's good for you will be good for the company, and what's good for the company will be good for you. So let's not debate equality, let's just get in there and do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvester. Thank you. Yeah, the power of storytelling, really quite something. All right, we are going to move along as quickly as we can. We're going to talk about accountability now with Professor Corné Davis from the University of Johannesburg.
Hello, everybody. Now, everything's been said that I was going to say, so I'm also sitting with those slides. Okay, so I'm going to kind of speak around those slides, okay? So you have seen a lot of statistics today. You've heard a lot. Everybody's throwing around statistics, a lot of statistics. But I want to stop with these statistics before I move on and speak to you specifically. If we're talking about equality, let's look at the consequences of inequality. What is actually happening with inequality? 1 out of 3 women in this country experience some kind of gender-based violence in their lifetime. Now, I interviewed with Tiki our study, which Richard was part, and Tears Foundation and KPMG, and we did this massive study. We spoke to 73 companies in the country. And still there was a lack of awareness that it's 1 out of 3 people, women, in the private sector as well, experiencing some kind of gender-based violence in their lifetime. And let's look at the consequence of that. We've got two terms. The one term is absenteeism, the other term is presenteeism. Absenteeism, people absent from work, not necessarily sick most of the time. South Africa is number 105 on the World Happiness Index. We've got the highest divorce rate. We've got the highest rate of alcohol consumption. Our intimate partner violence rate is 6 times higher than the global average. And let's define gender-based violence. It's any kind of verbal, emotional, psychological, financial, physical or sexual abuse. And if we look at intimate partner violence, the vast majority of rape is not perpetrated by strangers. Very much familiar with the victim. Very much in intimate relationships that it's happening. So we got to just bear this in mind if we're looking at the consequences. And gender-based violence is driven by inequality. It's driven because of women are stuck in situations where they cannot leave the perpetrator. They're financially dependent. So they cannot speak out in the workplace where you are. They can't speak out because it's stigmatized. So it's re-traumatization. So you've got the absenteeism that happens, but then you've got the presenteeism. What does that mean? You're at work, but you're not there. Tiki and I are involved in 2 international studies on gender-based violence. I'm involved with a national study with Tears Foundation. I'm involved with a study of intimate partner violence with Canada. The key driver, inequality, is a key driver of gender-based violence. And this is why we cannot not address gender equality. We've got some of the highest femicide rate in South Africa. The numbers of cases you see reported is about 7%. 93% of cases of intimate partner of gender-based violence never reported, never prosecuted, never known. And this is all coming as a consequence of inequality, where there's no opportunity for victims or perpetrators to come forward. That is what we need to keep in mind. Perpetrators also need support. We're living in a society that cultivates perpetrators, where patriarchy is rife, where we are showing it's okay to be unequal, that men have certain privileges. This is what we're saying in our society. This is why we still have inequality. So unless we, all of us, address the inequality in our homes, in our mindsets, we're not going to end gender-based violence. And it's hurting business. This is hurting business. We've shown you in our reports. We said conservatively estimated 36 billion. That's conservatively. Because remember, you don't know what's going on with 93% of the cases. So you're talking what you know and estimate based on the small percentage that's reported. Now we say it's 36 billion. It's probably 10 times that. But until we can talk about it, until victims can come forward and perpetrators can seek support, we're never going to know. So this is where you come in as private sector organizations, because we're not saying put a helpline in your office. We're saying educate your employees. Just give them information. Just give them stats. Just show them, you're not the exception. You're the rule. This is what's going on. One of those 3 women are victims of gender-based violence, and that I've been one as well. Personally experienced in my lifetime. And I'm an educated person. Imagine, we're all educated people. This is what's happening. So let's just look at some of the statistics. If women is half the workforce, but 37% of women contribute to the GDP. 26% women hold a C-suite position. And 120 of those are women of color. This is shameful. We see the numbers, but here we're sitting and we say, and we're saying, it's not okay. It's not okay. Only 7% of women on top listed JSE companies run by women. And now, I'm not going to repeat the statistics because you've seen a lot of it. And you know now so many men, the men are dominating. We know that. But just look at what our global economy could have increased. $12 trillion was the number. Now, if we add what Sylvester's saying with the diversity, that could have added another 6 trillion. We could have increased output by another 35% trillion if gender discrimination was ended. Because we're still living in a homophobic society. We're still there. So these things have got to change. Equality means equality for all. We are not just two genders. We are still counting. Last time there were 60-something gender identities. We're running. We're still counting. So look at these numbers, the other numbers. So what we're saying is that what we want to help. This is what we've been working towards, Shared Value Africa Initiative, our team. We've been working very hard towards this, is to enable, to show you how to. Because there's only one way we're going to do something. Face it, guys. We're only going to do it if it's easy. If it's difficult, we're going to come up with excuses. Fortunately, it's now easy. There's a tool to use. We're going to be telling you more about that just now. So it is easy. And I'm going to end, because Tiki loves it when I end in less time than I'm allocated. So I'm going to end in less time to stick to the program, because we've said this. And I'm going to end with my famous words that we need to leave with here today. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sure. Such a strong message. And the numbers really speak for themselves, don't they? I mean, they're just unanswerable. I'm reminded of how important numbers were from the very beginning, but when you see it like that, it's just very scary. All right, as the professor said, there's no excuse because there's a playbook to help you get this right. Joy Roworo is a communications and advocacy specialist who will introduce that to you now.
Oh, just breathe with me. So today's dialogue, as we've heard from every speaker, has been largely about gender equality and just providing safe spaces, a just society, a workplace where we're all equal. So that's why we're talking about powering towards gender equality. And Prof. Kone, I don't know why it was a good idea for me to speak after the professor. In any case, we're here. Some staggering statistics shared not just by yourself, but actually every speaker who's spoken today. And I think let's just put this into perspective. People have been sitting for a very long time, and my math is not my strength. But I'm going to take a gamble. Let's have the third row stand up, the third row from the front across the room. If you can just stand up momentarily, please. Third row. Okay. So if we look at that, that would be roughly the percentage of female executives in JSE-listed companies. Everybody else sitting down in this room, you have no chance. Yeah? Thank you. Have a seat. So, thank you. How do we even begin then? And I think that's what we wanted to discuss today. Where do we start? How do we start making the progress? And I think a lot of speakers have alluded to it. But my role today is to actually talk about the how to share about the solution, which is our solution. Because we've talked for decades and decades globally about the statistics like this today. We've talked about it. But how do we do it? And the truth is, no one is coming. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And so that's what we need to do today. So before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge our dedicated team, a team who has played a pivotal role in putting together the Gender Equality Toolkit Implementation Guide. If you can all, the team that's been involved, if you can stand, you're seeing them on the screen, if you can stand briefly so that people can just acknowledge you. Thank you very much. I think Tiki spoke to it earlier. It's been a labor of love. People just selflessly engaging and involving, and it's been a learning process, but absolutely worth it. So a number of people touched on this earlier, and the fact is that real transformation starts from honesty. It starts from the place of really being honest about where we are. And I think I'm going to quote you, Ignatius, today, because you touched on that too. And so today what we are launching is actually phase 1 of our gender equality journey. It's the first step to really analyzing where you are as organizations. And the private sector, it's been spoken about already, plays a critical, vital role in helping us move the needle on this subject in society. So the Gender Equality Toolkit is going to be that very thing that's going to help to assess and to evaluate where you are, what your status is. And then the implementation guide is a comprehensive resource that's going to help you to know how to move from where you are to where you need to be, where we all need you to be as private sector in South Africa. Oh, I needed to touch on the SDGs. So SDG 5 is the one that speaks to the subject of gender equality. And it really is the golden thread that loops through every other SDG. And until we recognize that, if we don't make a move on this area, we're not going to be able to accomplish the other SDGs. When it comes to ESG, most organizations struggle with the sustainability piece. And unless we make the move to start addressing issues of gender equality, sustainability is never going to be a hope for us. So there are many guides out there. And I think a number of you might be wondering, I mean, there are lots of toolkits, lots of guides around how to do this. So a lot of you may be wondering, what makes this one particularly different? And what makes it different is that it's an African developed solution, developed to address African specific challenges. We talk about the fact that South Africa is the gender-based violence capital of the world. So if we're taking a toolkit made somewhere in the global text, how is it going to fit the context here? How is it going to make a meaningful impact on the issues that we face within our own societies? Another speaker touched on it earlier on, the fact that we can't ignore how our culture has a part to play in where we find ourselves. So again, that's the real importance of having a locally based solution that's going to help to address the issues that are within our own space and within our own sphere. So the Gender Equality Implementation Guide assesses the equality across policies, which you're all seeing on the screen, across the policy development area, across our operations, across communication and engagement, and also the monitoring and evaluation. Because of course, once we start, we spoke a lot about how we need to implement, we need to actualize what we're speaking about. But there's no point doing it if we're not going to stop and regroup and assess how much progress we're actually making. Is it making a difference? So there's an arsenal, and you're not seeing clearly everything that's on the bottom of that screen, but there's an arsenal of resources within the implementation guide where it's going to help you to start looking at your codes of conduct, looking at all the various areas within your organization to help you understand where you're lacking, how to actually start making meaningful progress. So in short, and I see I've got 3 minutes to go, what am I saying? What am I saying is we need you. Our call to action is for you to join our pilot program. As I said, there's a wealth of resources and you won't grasp half of it. That last slide that we had, we battled because we wanted to give you everything, an information overload to show you just the value of all the work that's gone into this implementation guide. So what we're calling on you to do is to actually join our pilot program. And it's a limited one-time opportunity, exclusive offer, because we're starting it as a pilot for 5 organizations within the space. So what we want you to do is to seize that opportunity and engage and actually go on this journey. To do it, it requires buy-in from every level of the organization. Importantly, from leadership, the commitment of leadership to actually say they are behind this and they want to see it through. The willingness to do the gender audit. So we spoke about, and I'll touch on it a little bit later in a few moments, there's a self-assessment toolkit. And somebody else spoke earlier on about how it's not actually rocket science to establish where you stand as an organization in terms of your statistics for gender equality. It's not rocket science. So we are today going to be offering that toolkit, self-assessment toolkit, for you to do that check, and it's free. But once you've done that, then it's also going to be with this pilot, there is a nominal financial commitment for us to then walk this entire journey with you. And importantly, we're going to be extracting from this process best practice, extracting from this process learnings and insights and experiences that will be shared with other organizations. As I said, this is phase 1. We're going to continue and then broaden this engagement and this experience for other organizations within the country. So, there is a path to transformation. And the path starts really by establishing where you are in terms of your status with gender equality, and that's the self-assessment tool that I spoke about. The next part is to review the result, and then to reply if you're interested with more details. There will be a report when you do the assessment, which will just tell you briefly where you stand in the different areas, and what potentially needs to be done. If you need a more detailed report, again, we've got a short time frame for this offer to give you a more detailed report, and that is valid until the 30th of August. And then you can reach out to us if you want to start that transformation journey. And again, we speak of it as a journey because the reality is it's not a destination. We are always going to be learning and making progress in this area. So it's about starting that journey. And as far as I know, none of us have arrived. We're very far from where we need to be. The pilot will be on offer, as mentioned, and then we're there, the team of experts that you saw stand up earlier on will be there to support with comprehensive training, with comprehensive resources to assist you along that journey of making the changes and making the difference that will impact the children that are our future. Because you know in Africa we have the youth bulge. That youth bulge will hold us accountable for what we haven't done. And so it's important, and Prof. Kone spoke about these buffs that all the speakers are wearing. They say it's not okay. It's not okay that my daughters have to have in their handbags pepper spray as if it's lipstick. It's not okay. So this is where we are today. To recap, there is a path to transformation. You can't afford, as you leave, to not take with you the flyer which has a QR code for you to scan so that you can do, and it's free. When was the last time you got something meaningful for free? So take this opportunity, scan the QR code, and you can do the assessment to see where you stand. Tiki spoke earlier on, Vuyo's been running around, I'm sure a lot of you know her already. Reach out to discuss next steps and how we can support you along this journey. There will be comprehensive training, as I spoke already. So long-term benefits, I think every speaker has touched on it. It's not going to benefit just me or just you. It's going to benefit the entire economy. And that's what we're hoping for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joy. All right, we're nearly, sort of, kind of, almost at the end. And then you won't have to hear me again. Letty Bosani Pume from Momentum Metropolitan will make a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, esteemed guests and attendees. So, and Dr. Richard, I have this, but I have my notes on paper as backup. So I'm right there with you. Just gonna move this. And Dr. Ignatius, you mentioned the IQ going up when women enter the room, but I'm sure we'll agree that something special around EQ happens when we enter the room. It's volcanic. We were speaking about statistics. 1 in 3, I'm one of those 3, have experienced and have survived gender-based violence. So this is the face of gender-based violence. As we come to the close of this insightful gathering, I'm enthused by the collective commitment and shared vision that has permeated these discussions. Today, we have engaged meaningfully through conversation and we've exchanged valuable insights and uncovered strategies to drive gender equality forward across industries. This is the face of cross-industry collaboration. Now, in these closing moments, I just want to emphasize the importance of translating words into action. Enough talk. At its core, gender equality is a matter of basic human rights and morality, right? We all agree. Every individual deserves the opportunity to thrive and contribute without facing barriers based on their gender. By embracing gender equality, we champion a world that respects the inherent dignity and worth of every person, regardless of their gender identity. The journey towards gender equality is not a passive exercise. It requires deliberate, purposeful action from each and every one of us in leadership positions. It's not just about acknowledging the disparities that exist within our workplaces, but it's also about harnessing the transformative power of diversity and inclusion to create environments that empower and uplift all members of our teams at all levels. Today, we're standing at crossroads where the decisions that we make as leaders can have a profound impact on shaping the future of our organizations and industries as a whole. Gender equality is not just a moral imperative, it's a strategic imperative. But let's not be mistaken. Accelerating gender equality is not just about quotas or practices or policies in companies. It's about a cultural and a mindset transformation. It's about creating workplaces where authenticity, respect, and collaboration actually thrive. It's about dismantling biases, both overt and subtle, that have hindered progress for far too long. It's about fostering mentorship and sponsorship programs that amplify the potential of emerging leaders. It's about deliberately and unapologetically making room for the previously ignored and previously marginalized. We must champion gender equality, not just for the benefit of women, but for the benefit of our organizations and our country and future generations. It's time to move beyond conversations and embark on a journey of measurable change. Change that we can actually see and point to. Joy alluded to the fact that generations, our children, are going to ask us, what did you not do and why did you not do it? I implore each and every one of us as influential leaders in our respective fields to take what we've heard here today and put it into practice, deliberately and on purpose. As a tangible step, just to re-emphasize what Joy has said when she closed off, I encourage all of us to take with us the giveaway that's got the QR code, and that QR code leads to that gender equality self-assessment tool. Let's do that. This tool serves as a mirror for your organization. It will reflect the progress you've made in the areas that need attention. It will help to hold us accountable, to measure our efforts, and to guide us in pursuit of meaningful change. In my closing, let us be reminded that gender equality is not a distant goal. It's an urgent call for action. By fostering inclusive workplaces, we are not only creating a fairer, but a more innovative and prosperous world. As we leave this gathering today, let us carry the torch of change, lighting the path towards a future where equality is not just a dream, but a lived reality for all of us. Thank you for your dedication, each and every one of you, and for those of us who could not join us today, and your commitment to driving positive change. Together, we can accelerate equality and reshape our industries and society for the better. And with that said, I'm going to hand over back to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you, Leti Basani. Well, I would like to thank everyone really for coming. I'd like to thank those watching on the streaming service for the brain space, because I know on a Friday morning to have the brain space for it is really quite something. And I'd really like to thank you for coming today. It's really all about, and the image that's going to stay in my head is about expanding the third row, isn't it? It's about actually doing that. It's just the best description. It's the image I'm going to probably keep in my head the longest from today. I would like to thank everyone who's working towards this goal, and I'm going to break from my script. Will you join me in thanking Tiki for arranging the event?
So